Start the Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Three Rivers Library System Workshop. It is the Wild World of Copyright with Dr. Melissa Cast-Brede from the University of Nebraska at Omaha. So I'll hand it over to you, Melissa.
Okay, and I'll just take a moment here to share my PowerPoint here. I think. See, this is why you should do this ahead of time. Make sure I've got the right one up. But while I'm doing that, hello, everyone. Oh, I see what's happening. Yeah, can everyone see that slideshow? Nod. No?
We're seeing like the blue Windows screen.
You're seeing the blue windows. Oh, so let me try that again. Let's try that. So now we should be seeing each other. Okay, and the PowerPoint. Yep. Okay, doc. Good deal. So let me bring that up here. So is it full screen now? Awesome. Thanks for the nodding heads. I appreciate it. So as Tammy said, I'm Melissa Cast-Brede. I work at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. I've been a librarian for quite a while, and over the years, I've had occasion to talk about copyright. And I don't know about you, but I remember when I was in my library science classes and I was learning about copyright, I always swore, I remember clearly sitting in that desk saying, I am not going to be the person who deals with this. And I found out that I didn't have a choice, that it was going to come up whether I wanted it to or not. And so I just started, learning the basics and talking about the basics. And so that's my plan today, is to just kind of keep it to those basics. So I should clarify, as I said, I've been a librarian. I am not a lawyer, and I cannot provide legal assistance or advice. And every webinar I've attended on copyright, the person has said the same thing. Even the lawyers who are presenting on copyright are like, I can't give you legal advice. And, part of it is to, protect ourselves. But also I've learned over the years that it's just because every instance is unique. There's a reason copyright is somewhat vague and not necessarily black and white in all instances. And it's because every situation is unique. It has a context that really shapes how we interpret the scenario and what's happening. So we can't just say yes or no without really getting into it. So what I've learned to focus in on is just some basics that helps me question and think through each scenario so I can make a decision for my own use, but maybe help somebody else decide for themselves. So I can't tell anyone, but I can tell them the things that they need to think about so they can make some decisions on their own. Now, before I get started here, I like to start sharing resources instead of sharing them at the end, because those always whiz by and it's like, oh, wait a minute, where are they? So I like to share those. And if I can find my cursor here, disappeared on me. There we go. I'll paste these into the chat. So there's a couple of them there for the chat. But I want to point out that there are referred to a couple articles with Carrie Russell, who is the copyright specialist with the American Library Association. And when I was originally asked to speak today, I was asked to address story times. So we'll talk big picture, but we'll also use story times as an example. And both of these articles here are her explanation of story time in terms of fair use and copyright. So you may want to look at those. And I could just hand you those and say, here's that. But I think it's useful, again, for us to talk through the different pieces of copyright and fair use so we can apply them in different situations. So today, I'm going to just go over some foundational ideas first, because we're all coming from different places. It looks like there's a number of us. So we'll kind of look through those different basic foundational pieces, and then we'll just walk through the idea of fair use with story times and ask some questions. Hopefully this will be interactive. So please make use of the chat. I'm going to ask some questions, and if you would respond to chat, if you feel comfortable speaking on a microphone, we can give that a try too. I'm open for that. This is the wild world of it, so we can try that. And then if there's time, we'll also look at, just things that are specific to libraries where the law actually mentions libraries and what we can do. And make sure we have time for questions if anybody has them. So that's the plan. So can't get much more foundational than the Constitution of the United States, can we? I'd like to remind folks that copyright is our right. This is a right that belongs to all of us. It's in the Constitution. It's because the forefathers thought it was a good idea that if we have ideas that can further our country, further our status as individuals, we should be able to, make a little money off of it for a limited time. So you can see by securing for limited times, exclusive rights to what we create, our inventions, our ideas, our works. So this is in the very foundation of our country. As a result, this copyright holder gets to decide things about copies, derivatives, distributing copies, not just making them, but distributing them or performing them or displaying them, all of that stuff. The copyright holder gets to decide. And so later, what we'll get into are times when maybe we don't have to ask permission and how we decide when those times are. But first, who actually gets to own copyright? And how do they get copyright? So there's a reason I have this picture up here. We'll get to it in a minute. But if I look at if you would use the reactions there, if you would wave a hand or use one of the symbols there for everyone here who owns copyright. Who owns a copyright? Okay, I see some. A few. I only see a few though. Okay, I've got you on a second screen here. Yeah, here's the thing. We all probably own copyright. We just maybe not think of it. We haven't applied for it, but we own copyright. According to the law, copyright occurs when the idea takes a tangible form. The expression of an idea takes a tangible form. So I am a huge doodler. So technically speaking, my lovely doodles are protected by copyright. Now, not that I'm worried about anybody using them or anything without my permission or finding them or anything like that, but they are protected. And that's why we have this picture here of Naruto, who is a black-crested macaque. This was in the news a few years ago. A photographer, I don't remember where they were, but they were out in the wilds taking pictures of wildlife, set his camera down, walked away. Lovely Naruto here picked up the camera, looked at it, and snapped, took a picture. The photographer started selling it, making money off of it. And organizations, animal rights groups are like, no, you can't, you didn't take the picture. Neruda took the picture. They own copyright because it's when an expression of an idea takes a tangible form, and that's what they were arguing. Now, this got settled out of court, so there was really not a final decision on it, but there's that idea that's when something takes a tangible form, it is protected by copyright. We don't need just that copyright symbol there. We need to approach it that almost everything we see out there is protected by copyright, with the exception of items in the public domain. And I'm just realizing I don't have a slide on the public domain, but the public domain are items that are available in the public for use without permission. So many people identify those on things like the Copyright Clearinghouse Center, items that were once protected by copyright, but their protections have expired. So we think of things before 1925 and before are now in the public domain for the most part. Most things created by the federal government are within the public domain. There are always exceptions, but those general rules are there. Now, there's also the first sale doctrine, and this is important for us because it's how we check out books. And the first sale doctrine says that if you buy a copy of something, that copy is yours to sell, display, check out, but just that copy. So that physical copy, we can lend. That's why we can lend things. This is why we can sell the books once we withdraw them from our shelves. Because first sale doctrine says that copy we can do. So this is why we can do story walks. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with story walks, where you have books and you put individual pages on signs, and then you walk around the story to see different pages. And at each sign, there's an activity, or in this case, you see reading questions. So we can't scan these pages and make copies of these pages and put them on signs. But we can buy a physical copy of that book, actually probably 2 physical copies because there's things on both sides, take them apart and post those on signs. So those are because of the first sale doctrine. Now, it does not apply to making copies. So that's why we cannot make copies and put them on our story box. We cannot distribute necessarily those copies. And it also doesn't include things that are covered by licenses, like those shrink wrap licenses on software, anything we rent, because we do rent books. So we want to make sure our licenses allow for us the books we rent to check out, and ebooks, and we have to follow the licenses of those items. So first sale does not cover those items. So next we have fair use as a foundational item. And this is where we'll spend the bulk of our time. Fair use, I've heard it called defenses, I've heard it called exemptions. I just think of it as a time where the law allows us to use someone's intellectual property because of certain conditions, because within those conditions, it's just fair. It's just fair for somebody to be able to use this in this situation because of different circumstances. So we want to look at it today in terms of story times and our story times fair use. Now, those factors, those circumstances that we have to consider for fair use are 4 items: the purpose of the use, the nature of the use, not the nature of the use, excuse me, the nature of the work. That's very important, the nature of the work, the amount of use, how much did you use, and the effect on the market. So we have to consider all 4. We can't just pick the one we think, oh, we're strongest here, so we're going to go with that. You have to consider all 4 and be balanced across those. So the first one is one that many people are familiar with, right? That purpose of the use, why we're using it. So, are we making any money off of this? Is it educational or for nonprofit use? Are we being transformative in what we're doing? And I like to highlight that a lot of times people say, well, it's for educational, so it's okay. There are times when your educational use is not necessarily protected. For example, think of textbooks. Textbooks, schools are the market for textbooks, and they're definitely educational purpose, but that does not mean they can just go around photocopying textbooks and stuff like that. Partially because they are the same market, which is the fourth fair use factor. So we have to consider all four factors. If you are the same market, then it becomes trickier. And then we also need to consider transformative. Is the use transformative, meaning you're using it for a purpose other than it was originally intended often? So there's, criticism is often considered transformative, commentary, news reporting, and parroting. So it's what are we adding to the purpose? What are we doing to change the character of the work without being a substitute for the original work? So I'm going to stop for a moment, and I want to ask you, again, you can put this in the chat box, or you can, speak up if you like, but when we think about story time, what is our purpose behind story time? I should bring the chat up if I'm going to ask you to post things in the chat, shouldn't I? Okay, so I see create love of books and reading in children. So it's to create reading appreciation, an interest in reading. There are other purposes out there. I want to speak up. Educating and entertaining. What are we educating about? Is a question to ask. Whatever may be the topic of the book, perhaps. Are we also teaching vocabulary? Are kids learning vocabulary in there? Are they learning how to interact? If it's preschool kids before they get off to kindergarten, are they learning to be in a group? Okay, I see book appreciation, learning to read, learning themes. Okay, so then if we consider the purpose of a book, reading and early literacy skills, good. So we're looking at things. If we consider the purpose of the book, we can see that many of these things are a little different than the original purpose of the book. There's the entertaining piece of the book, but there's also these other things of learning themes, learning to read, book appreciation. So those are, in addition to, we're looking at something for a different purpose. So when we look at, Carrie Russell's work, she talks a lot about exactly what you all just said. The book appreciation, learning to enjoy reading, increased reading motivation, learning themes, learning to read. All those things are part of an educational purpose. Now, when you read those stories, do you just read them from cover to cover and straight through and don't do anything else? I see some head going, no. What else are you doing?
A lot of librarians will ask questions to try to get interaction. Like Rebecca said, asking comprehension questions.
Right. So you're asking questions about comprehension. Do they understand this? Or maybe relating them to a character. Have you ever felt like that? Or what do you think they're feeling now? Or, gee, what do you think is going to happen next? Is it a predictable book so they can predict what's going to happen and build those cognitive skills? So you're doing more than just reading from cover to cover. So you're engaging with them, and that adds to that educational purpose, doesn't it? Because it's not just about the story. It's about them understanding the story. Maybe you're picking up on keywords, there's rhythm, there's themes, learning themes in there. There's a concept book, learning about opposites. So you can build, well, what other opposites do you think about? There's that educational piece. Right. Now, what if we're doing this over Facebook, or we're recording it to post online? Do you still do those odd things? I hope so, because that's where kids are there commenting. Yeah, I see colleagues saying yes. We still do that. You pause, you wait for those. So that's one of the things you want to think about when you're talking about the purpose. You're asking those questions, you're doing those additional things for an educational purpose, and they're adding to the story itself. If I move it. So the next is the purpose and character of, well, this is purpose and character. I just wanted to highlight a little bit more about parody. If you're doing parody, it has to be clear that you're making fun of someone. So for instance, on the left, we have the New Yorker magazine, and then we have the movie poster for the movie Moscow on the Hudson. And there was a lawsuit over this, and the movie poster lost because it wasn't funny. They chose the format and everything, but they weren't even making fun of them. There just wasn't, it wasn't a real parody. You got to be clearly making fun. And it's like, well, that's not really making fun. However, the Vanity Fair and Naked Gun 33 1/3, some people find that very funny. Some don't, maybe. But it is clear that someone's making fun of him. The other point about parody is you can only use enough to make your point. You can only use enough imagery to make your point. So you can't go overboard. You needed enough on Leslie Nielsen there, his imagery, so to make it clear that they're referring back to the Vanity Fair cover. Okay, the second fair use factor is the nature of the work, and that is the work you're using. So it is, in the case of Story Times, it's that picture book, right? So is it creative or fact-based? If it's creative, it's more protected. If it's a fact-based item, it has fewer protections. If it's published, it has more protection. Less protection. If it's unpublished, it's really much more protected. And then the other thing to think about is how important is it to the educational objectives? So if we think of story time, a lot of times the works we're using, are they creative or are they fact-based? Likely more creative. Yeah. They're probably published. Okay, and Holly says we include nonfiction book with our story. So one of the things we want to consider with that, okay, so it's nonfiction, so it's more facts-based. Are the representations, maybe the imagery, that stuff, what is the creativity of those? So it's a balance. But so yeah, with nonfiction though, it's good to have those in there because kids need to see those differences, don't they? It leads more to fact-based. Now, if we think back to our purpose, how important is this work to the educational objectives? They're pretty darn important, aren't they? So we have creative, and they're published. Yeah, child development needs realism. So they're, nonfiction really brings that in educational objectives. The stories, as we're talking about before, with the learning themes and the reading appreciation and all of that, those objectives. They're pretty important to that. But yeah, a lot of them are creative too. So with that creativity piece, that leans away from fair use. So there's a little tension there. You know, it's not a clear slam dunk for us with the second fair use factor. Now, the third fair use factor is amount of use. Like, are you using the whole thing? Are you only using a portion? If you're using a portion, is it the most significant part of it? Using just the amount you need for the educational purpose? Are you using more than is needed? So it's a lot of things to ask. It's not just like how many pages. In our case with story time, anybody not use the whole thing? Right, we use the whole thing. So yeah, that kind of leads away from fair use. We are using the whole thing. And as a result, we are using the heart of the work because we're doing the whole thing. Now, the question is, are we using the amount? Are we using more than is needed for our educational purpose? So that is something that you would have to be able to make an argument for. Yeah, why is it that we need the whole thing to meet this educational purpose and do that? Now, what, again, if you are doing this on Facebook Live or you're recording this, now you've got pictures. I mean, you've got the pictures with the kids are there, but you're not copying them. But if you're recording yourself, are you showing the pictures? Yes, probably. Now, how are you showing the pictures? Are they like full screen, like all the way? Big book cover there. Or is it just part of you? I should have had one with me where, there we go. New kid. If I'm just kind of reading it like this. Holding the book while I read. So just kind of like this. So how, like, you can see that. What's the quality of this image? I mean, like, is this something somebody could click a screenshot of and take it and get a really good copy of? And maybe the cover isn't so great either. So there's this question of substantiality. How substantial is it? And other court cases outside of story time where there's been images used, one of the questions is, you know, the quality. How significant is it in terms of the quality of the resolution? And there have been times when the resolution was just so bad that it's not really, doesn't amount to much because it's insubstantial. So they're talking about the amount of use or substantiality of the use. And so you don't want to have a full screen of like the book cover. Probably not. But, you know, showing it as part of a screen leans more towards fair use than that whole book cover there. So you want to think about how you're doing it and what images are you showing with this. You know, something else that just occurred to me that I probably should have mentioned back with purpose is, you know, if you're including music with this, sometimes I know there's music with story time, right? You sing songs and stuff like that. That's a whole other piece of copyright that you also need to consider in with it. So there's a lot of stuff happening within our wonderful story times that we want to think about. So that's the third fair use, how much we're using of it. That goes back to parity a little bit. Are we using too much? And so this is a court case that Louis Vuitton sued this canvas bag company called My Other Bag because they put an image that looks an awful lot like their Louis Vuitton purse on their canvas bag. And this is a commercial use. There's no educational purpose behind this canvas bag. So this is clearly a commercial use. One of the questions, and it's parody. And so part of the question is, did they use too much imagery to get their point across? And we see that there are differences, but it's also enough similarity that we get that it's Louis Vuitton, and they're making a tongue-in-cheek joke about, high style and fashion. So Louis Vuitton did lose this, but again, they didn't go all out and make it exact. It's the, was it substantial enough? Okay, and again, the full image. Are we using a full image here, like this gentleman, could be lady, on our full screen, or are we keeping it just a small, see part of it on the screen? And then the fourth fair use factor, is there an effect on the market? Are we impacting the market for these books, or a potential market for these books? So there was a case with Seinfeld where someone created a book of trivia questions based on Seinfeld. And so the folks who owned Seinfeld did not have a trivia book out there. But the courts ruled against the individual who created the trivia book because part of it, there were several reasons. Part of it was amount of use, shared purpose, it wasn't transformative, but also there was a potential market for Seinfeld to create a trivia book on the television show, and this would limit that potential market. So they lost. So in the world of story times, I'm seeing people saying no and no, that it does not have an effect on the market. Why doesn't it have an effect on the market for the books? Would someone not buy the book because, I can watch it on YouTube? Holly's recordings are not public, so it's for limited use. That's part of a question to ask. That takes it more within the envelope of their use and effect on the market. Other reasons why it might not affect the market, or it might affect the market. If you click ahead to those links that I sent you with Carrie Russell, one of the arguments she makes for it being fair use is that it doesn't have effect on the market because the publishers are not selling a product. There's not an option to license these. You can't, that's not there. If there was an option to license permission to do that, there might be a situation, but there isn't. There's no way to license permission for this at this time. Also, we could be helping the market. The purpose is to create appreciation for books, interest in reading. That's one of our original purposes. So for that, in that case, are we then to be encouraging the market for books, favorite books? So then, and we have several people saying, I've had parents tell me they bought a book for their child. And yes, it's because of the story time we did, because it became a favorite. And they wanted to hear it all the time. So if we think about storytime fair use, purpose, our educational purpose is we're adding something to that story. We have something more than just the entertainment of that story. We're talking about learning themes, book appreciation, reading, vocabulary. There's a lot of stuff there. And we're adding questions to enhance that purpose within it. The nature of the work is leaning against fair use. The amount is leaning against fair use. But then we have the market and the question of, are we impacting a market? Or are we encouraging a market for that? So the ALA expert, Carrie Russell, says that yes, it is fair use and it has been considered fair use, as well as electronic. But you still need to keep all these things in mind when you do that. And with other programming you do or other things you do in your library, you always want to go through and be able to say, this is why. You don't necessarily want to say, well, it's because there's this article that says this. We want to be able to think through these things and decide for yourself, because every situation is different. Okay. So that was story time and something like that. But there are times when a library can copy an item for somebody. We copy a book chapter for somebody, or maybe this article for somebody. Why can we do that? Or when can we do it? When can't we do it? Oh, I see a question there. Do authors ever have issues with their books being used in story times? I have not heard of one. That does not mean it hasn't happened, but I have not heard of one. There's been some discussion about that it would be bad PR. So they're probably not likely to do it because of the PR around it. But I haven't heard of one, but I can't say for sure that there has been or hasn't been. So when copying an item, again, it's not going to be the full book. We know that. But if we're making a copy for a patron, we have to be sure that it's for the patron's personal use, their study. We copy a portion, not the entire thing, when it's old enough, right? And we can do it when it's for the patron's use. There are many college libraries who will do a document delivery service because it's for a student or a faculty member's own personal study or their own personal scholarship for their research. So it's for their personal use. And if you do that, you have to have this little copyright notice on, a sheet on top of it, stapled to it, attached to it. That includes a copyright notice. And if you don't have that, a little warning that, this is for personal use, that kind of thing. What about making a copy for the library? Thanks to the Sonny Bono Act and the 1998, the library may make a copy, and this goes back to when it's old enough, if it's in the last 20 years of its copyright. So anybody know the copyright term? How long copyright lasts for an item? It's probably one of those foundational things I should mention. 72 years. It's life of the author plus 70 years. So the 70 years starts when the creator passes away. If it's a corporately created item, I believe it's 90 years. So 90 years. So in the last 20 years, if it's copyright, if it's not being distributed commercially right now, it's not a crazy price. If it's, it's not available at something that's at a reasonable price. Now, reasonable price is not defined. So you have to keep that in mind. You have to have that copyright notice. You have to be open to the public. You can't be a library that's closed, just an internal within a corporation or something like that. You have to be open to the public. And you can only make 3 copies. And they have to stay on the premises. premises is also not defined. So if you're a library within a building, such as a community center, is it the library or is it the building, the premises? Those things aren't defined. What about your patrons? We have scanners, we have photocopiers. Are we liable? Put notices, put posting, copying on, put notices on the copiers. Oh, be sure we put notices on the copiers. And again, it's clearly stated, we have a notice near the equipment. So the copiers, the scanners. What about people's phones, smartphones, iPads? And they take a picture. Well, libraries have started putting a notice on their walls. This is from Walpole University. So you have notices similar to those for your photocopiers. You have notices there. Okay, thank you for playing along and answering some questions back. Do you have any questions? Let's take this down so I can see people.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
This is Lisa Flaxbeard. I don't have my camera on right now. But,
That's okay.
We just started doing story time in person, and so we're social distancing, and so people are spread out in this large room. And so an idea came about where we could, when we have this really large TV screen called a Clear Touch monitor, and can we scan the picture just for story time so they can see the story? And then it's also, if it's also on Facebook, you know, because I thought of the copyright issues here, but it's like, is that fair use so people can see it because it's so far away? So we're really basically just enlarging the image.
Right. So what is the purpose of scanning them?
So that it can get on the screen and be large.
Right. So it's not adding necessarily to the educational purpose. You're not doing anything additional to it to add to that educational purpose that you're having with story time, are you?
No, it's just so they can see it.
Just so they can see it, right?
It'd be the same purpose, yeah.
Yeah, so it's the same purpose. The nature of the work is still creative, and the amount is the whole thing, and you're using the whole screen. And I'm presuming it's a pretty good quality for people to see it.
Yes.
Right. And then we have the effect of the market, because it is such a big thing. And that, are you affecting the market? Can you return to the library rules form? Sure, in a minute here. I'm not a lawyer, and so I would really look at those and think about that the full screen and the setting of those would make me nervous. And if you're sharing it outside the building, that makes me even a little more nervous.
And it's not like, if it's shared outside the building, it's in the background. I mean, it's not, the full screen is not on Facebook. Still seeing this, you're seeing the person reading it.
Right.
So it's, yeah.
Right.
We just thought, we were like, oh, this will
give
us the opportunity to to increase the quality of our story time.
Right.
Because we have to social distance. We wouldn't do it normally.
Yeah.
Because the kids could get up, you know, get closer
And see the books.
and see the book.
Right.
So it's a very visual thing, story time.
Right. It is. Yeah. Yeah. Story time is a very visual thing. And you have those interactions, but I'm not sure that anything new is added to those pictures. And that would be a concern.
Okay.
But,
and then
if your town has a lawyer, talk to them.
Okay. And if you have permission from the author to put it on Facebook, because we do do that all the time.
Right. If you have the permission from the author
or the publisher.
I was going to say the publisher. There's a lot of, not just the author, you've got the illustrator.
Publisher. Yeah, it's a publisher.
So if you have the publisher's permission and save that permission, then yeah. So yeah, there's nothing to stop anyone from contacting the publisher and saying, hey, because of social distancing, and make sure you're clear that you're only doing it for that period of time, that you are not going to use the images ever again, or anything else. It's just that one, really set the boundaries and ask for permission. You can ask for permission.
Okay. Yeah, that's just, it's making me nervous. So that's we maybe shouldn't be doing that, but it sure is a really nice way to have story time.
Yeah.
In these times.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, it doesn't hurt to shoot an email. Doesn't take much time to write it. And then you got it.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Right. And someone has posted that the publishers have extended the deadline to June 30th. So if they're doing that, you can do that. And then the question said, can you return to the library rules one? Which library rules slide did you want? For us keeping copies, the archival copies. So notice that is for preservation purposes. Is that the one? Okay. So you want to be sure it's something that, obviously for preservation or research. So a lot of times it's things of local interest and stuff like that, not necessarily limited to that. Other questions or comments? Thoughts in response to the screen, the full screen story time? Okay, can I mention more about music? So music will have its own, I was just looking to see if there are other questions, its own set of copyrights. And so it's the composition itself, the sheet music has it. If you're using a recording, then you've got the performer's rights. If they have like a piano player, then you've got the piano player's rights. So there's a whole bunch of rights in there. Now there are, individuals out there who are sharing their works for free and out there for you to use and putting them in the Copyright Clearinghouse, and they're making them in the public domain that they're free to use for educational purposes. So you can find those if you're playing those in the background and use those instead. But everything that we said about, fair use applies to that music as well. And if you're using the music just as entertainment within there, then are you really, meeting an educational purpose for it? So you really want to question that. And again, you can ask permission. And even if you're singing it, make sure somebody wrote that song. And so that composition is protected, even if you're singing it. So check that. And there's a lot of classics out there that are prior to 1925 that you could use as well. But you want to keep that music in mind, whether or not you can use it, because there's a whole slew of music that's available for you to use. One other thing that just popped into my head, if you remember when I was talking about the market, and I was saying, was there already this mechanism for you to license the book to be read through Storytime? And there isn't. There is a mechanism for music. The music industry has long had places where you go to license use of it. Music programs in high schools and schools, whenever they do an assembly and they perform music, there's a mechanism for the school to pay royalties to use that music, perform that music. So there is a mechanism for music that's readily available that you can go and pay for music. And so that is there, whereas there isn't for, somebody reading the story. The publishers industry hasn't done that for Storytime and reading it, but there is for music and the use of music. And so because there's a licensing option for use available for music, you really need to think about music when you're using it. And yes, there are a lot of books that are being read on YouTube already and doing that. And because of that, Carrie Russell in particular, who I keep referring to, but she's written a lot on copyright and libraries, talks about that and says, there's a lot of books being read on YouTube already. It's setting a precedent. Now, there's a lot of people doing stuff a lot of times that doesn't mean that's right. It's okay. But that does lend itself more to an argument for it. Yes. Other questions?
Just going back to the YouTube, I remember having to read some books for classes, like children's books. My library didn't have it, the neighboring library didn't have it, and it was going to take me too long to order it. And I would find someone reading it on YouTube, and that directly affected the market because I didn't purchase it because I needed to read it just for the class and was able to. I even thought back then, yeah, that probably isn't right.
Right. And as someone says, it reminds me of YouTubers playing video games. They don't squawk about it because it's free PR, but some do. Or there is, they submit to YouTube for a takedown notice and take it down. So this goes into a whole other thing, but there's a Digital Millennial Copyright Act that for YouTube to not be liable in copyright situations, they have to have a system set up where if someone complains about a copyright violation, YouTube has to be able to quickly take it down, send notice to the person who allegedly did this, and give them time to respond and explain why it was not a violation of copyright before they'll put it back up again. So, right. Some folks don't think it's PR. Now, when you're playing those video games, or sometimes what they call reaction videos, where you're watching something and you're reacting to it, there are arguments that is commentary. If we go back to the purpose, that's commentary, or it could be criticism because they're talking about how good the game is and this and that. There have been arguments that those are within the fair use under that first purpose of use because you're adding commentary, you're adding criticism to it. And someone said you have to be really careful if you're using something with Disney. And yeah, I would just say yes. You have to be careful with Disney. And I would say big corporations in general, they have full departments. Other questions or comments?
The parody, this probably shows my age, but it reminds me of the Weird Al Yankovic thing with all the parodies, all the music.
Right. And he does ask permission. He does ask permission to do that. I know this because I researched he did a parody of a Ludacris song, and he did ask, and he thought he had received, and Ludacris was very upset that he did not give approval of it, and so it made the news. And he's like, no, I make a point of asking permission before I do that. So he does ask permission. But like, think about Saturday Night Live, Carol Burnett show. You know, they do parodies a lot, all the time, and they have been sued. I saw something a few years ago where Carol Burnett, someone was doing a parody of Carol Burnett, and Carol Burnett ironically sued, even though she had been, you know, with her sketch, had been sued a few times, and she won. She was okay because of parody. So, and going back to Disney, I don't know how many people have seen the fair use tale video that explains fair use using clips from Disney. And so it's clips from all the different Disney movies. So you're just getting snippets of words from different Disney movies. But Disney, because Disney has a reputation for really being rigorous in defending their intellectual properties, you know, they're making fun of Disney, but they're using so many different things that you never get a complete, you know, even scene. It's just like one or two words amongst dozens of different Disney movies to explain fair use and copyright. And so you should Google fair use tale sometime and see the video. There's various postings of this video out there to show you that you know, you can do this. You can use work. And you just really want to make sure that you're being really thoughtful and creative of what you're using it for. You don't want to just hinder people for doing it, but you really want to make sure you're doing that when it comes to this purpose, that your purpose is really adding to it and transforming it, doing something more than its original purpose is for. And story time, and a lot of, you know, you're doing so much more with it than just telling that story. And so when you're doing things, you want to make sure that you're able to explain to someone what that is. And you advocate for yourself, advocate for your library doing that. Other questions, comments? Yeah.
There's always so much to learn.
There is. And again, I guess I really just, you know, when you're using something, go through the 4 fair use factors and really think about what you're doing, what you're using, how much you're using, and balance that out. You know, because there are times when your use may not be educational, like this bag, but it fits within fair use because they were doing something more with it. You know, and there's no way you're going to confuse a canvas bag with a Louis Vuitton bag. You know, there's things like that. Because of that, they're doing it. So I like to look at these commercial things because then it gives you a sense of what you can do in an educational setting, because you already have that nonprofit educational piece. You just want to make sure that, you know, your purpose there is that, and not the same purpose, and that you're not the market for that use, that you're doing something more. And with Storytime, you're doing something more. You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yes, thank you so much. You always make a dry subject seem so much more clear.
I don't know. What I would encourage people to do is just watch the news, because there are so many copyright cases in the news, and just reading the news stories and seeing the decision helps you understand what the boundaries are and what they aren't are. Like, I was just, before we started, I was just telling Tammy, I saw a news story about the Andy Warhol Foundation and a photographer. They used a photographer's work, and they won the first lawsuit, but I just saw a headline that a court reversed that decision. So I have to go back and see. And the question was, were they really transforming the work enough to not be that substitute for the original work? And so I have to go back and look at that. And just read those in the news. It doesn't, these news articles will give you like a 2-sentence explanation, and you can take those and learn how to apply them to the decisions we're making in libraries a lot, either how we're helping our patrons or with what we're doing. Guess that's all I got.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Anytime.